Good afternoon. This is Stan Koutstaal. I'm the Program Manager for the Health Profession Opportunity Grant. Before I get underway, I'm wondering, Stacy, if there's any housekeeping issues that you wanted to mention before we get going.
Yes, Stan. This is Stacy, and thank you everyone for attending. I would just like to let you know that if you do have a technical question, to go ahead and send a chat to the host, and we can assist you with that. And if you have a question for the presenters today, would you please go ahead and click on the Q&A button at the top right of your screen and send in your question, and that will be addressed by OFA. And enjoy the webinar, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stacy. And welcome, everybody. This is the HPOG webinar on grant closeout and no-cost extensions.
Hello. This is a call for Donita.
And we're getting some interesting feedback through our monitor here, so I'm sorry for seeming to be distracted, at least momentarily. Give us just 1 second, and we'll see if we can turn down the volume on our monitor here. Okay. So I am sharing my screen, and on my screen, hopefully you're able to see a document that has the title Initial Information and Timelines regarding HPOG Closeout. We're going to be going through this today. While I'm sharing my screen as I am, I'm not able to view questions and answers, provide answers to questions that you post. However, we'll definitely reserve time at the end of this webinar where hopefully we'll get to as many as we can. So let me just jump in. With me, I'm pleased to say that Tim Chappelle from the Office of Grants Management is also on the line and will be addressing issues from a financial perspective that complements the issues that I'll be addressing from a programmatic perspective. Tim, do you just want to say hello so that people hear your voice?
Hello and good afternoon.
Thanks so much, Tim. So getting started, this is a document that we have sent out to you and hopefully you've reviewed. We'll go through it pretty closely. It informs you that the grant closeout process will begin as soon as possible after the project period end date. And it's the grant closeout process that determines whether or not you've met all of the requirements of the grant award. Within 90 days after the project period end date, you must submit a federal financial report that Tim will talk about, a final performance progress report, and the tangible personal property form and real property status report, if applicable. Let me turn it over to Tim, and he will talk for a moment about the federal financial report and what's important to include.
Thanks, Stan. The final federal financial report must cover the entire project period and reflect no unliquidated obligations. The grantee must ensure that any unobligated balance reported is accurate, as the Office of Grants Management will deobligate these funds from the grant award through an accounting adjustment to PMS. The obligation of funds is not considered an adverse action and is not subject to appeal. Grantees should ensure that their SF-425 reports are clearly marked as final and are in sync with the information reported to the payment management system. If there is an unobligated balance reported on the final SF-425 report, and that amount is deobligated from the grant and returned to Treasury, and it causes your payment account to be overdrawn, it will trigger the HHS debt collection process. So the key here is that if you have a person who prepares the SF425 report, and that person is different than the person who completes your PMS Federal Cash Transaction Report, please make sure they talk to each other so that the information that is sent forth is in sync and is accurate. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Tim. Now I'll talk a minute about the final PPR, or Performance Progress Report. It should contain information for the entire project period. And at this point, I'll review some of the additional information that we've already sent. So bringing up on my screen now is a form that's called the SFPPR, and it's been approved for use by a lot of different ACF programs, and it's really a blank template. And one of the things that you'll notice about this blank template is it has an appendix. I'm just going to scroll down to the appendix because the Appendix B provides some program indicators, and that includes major activities and accomplishments during the period, problems, significant findings and events, and some other things. And you'll notice a series of blank cells where you can provide information. So what we're doing is we're also providing you with a template, and I'm opening up a PDF file, but I'm pretty sure that we're also, we've sent this to you, or if we haven't, we will. We'll send it as a Word document, which you're able to complete and submit to us. And in filling this out and in following the instructions here are simply tailored to the HPOG program and provide some guidance as to how you can use the really generic form and fill out some of the blank cells that exist there. So the first, and I'll spend just a couple of minutes going through this. The first cell is for major activities and accomplishments. And what you should do is run a PRS 11 management report, which provides comprehensive, cumulative is the word I was looking for, cumulative data from the start date of the program through the entire project period. In addition to that, you should attach that report to the final report, and it will stand for reporting the 5-year progress of your grant. You should also review that report and provide answers to the following questions. You should restate the original 5-year enrollment, completion, and employment goals, and then state what was achieved from PRS 11 and compare what you actually achieved to the goals that you stated, and then provide any explanation for why you would have missed, achieved, or exceeded, depending on how things went for you. And we would also like you to describe what would you want individuals to know who are reading this final report that is not reflected through the PRS 11 in your explanation. So just an opportunity to provide a brief comment about what your stated objectives were and what the data in the PRS shows. The next cell is problems, and here we ask you to provide the following. Over the last 5 years, what were the grant program's biggest lessons learned? What worked well? What were the grant program's biggest challenges? Simply list those and explain the context for each. Significant findings and events. We're asking that you provide a success story to your program that you are most proud of, that demonstrates your program's success. For example, there may be a person that advanced through multiple steps along the career pathway, and you may submit a success story that you've submitted previously, and just describe the circumstances of that person's life. Dissemination activities we feel is not applicable, so there's no need to complete that section. Other activities, we'd like you to give a brief description of career pathways in your program. What did you do to establish and use them? How did you create on-ramps to make them accessible to more people? And how were participants in your program advised of career pathways and the options that exist for continued education? So thinking about a career pathway, how did you reach as far down as you possibly could, and what did you do to position people so that they could continue an upward trajectory? And then the final section is activities planned for the next reporting period. And again, this one won't be relevant unless you're, well, as a final PPR, it's not relevant at all. So there's no need to provide any information there. To step back and talk just generally about what we want the final PPR to do, our intent was to provide a place where you could tell the overarching story and share the general themes of your grant. We want you to provide us with information that might not be captured in semi-annual progress reports previously submitted, and we wanted to provide a template that enabled you to keep it fairly simple, and we wanted to avoid complex data reports or analysis. So this is the outcome of that. So at this point, I'm going to go back to the initial guidance document that we started talking about and turn it back over to Tim to talk about property, real property, and tangible personal property and the related forms for that. Tim?
Okay. Title to property, and what we mean by property in this case is equipment purchased by the grantee with grant funds shall vest with the recipient in accordance to Title 45 CFR Part 75, Section 75.320. Therefore, the grantee may continue to use the property as long as needed. However, disposition of property acquired with federal funds must be made in accordance to 45 CFR 75.320 and Forms SF-428 and SF-429. The grantee should consult the grantor agency for any additional disposition instructions. And just to kind of elaborate a little bit, 45 CFR Part 75 is HHS's implementation of the OMB Omni Circular. And so it combines the Omni Circular as well as HHS's past CFRs Part 74 and 92. They're all there together and represented in Part 75. Equipment with an original acquisition cost of $5,000 or more must be reported on the Form SF-428, and the form must be marked final in Box 6. Although I don't think real property purchase was allowed for the HPOG program, you still must complete the SF-429 form and indicate NA for not applicable on the form. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Tim. Let's go back to the SF-428 for just a moment so that folks have an understanding as concrete as possible in terms of what they should do. So a number of programs made investments of sometimes $20,000 or more for a medical mannequin, and now they've reached the end of the 5-year project period. What happens to the mannequin?
The organization can continue to use the mannequin for allowable purposes as long as needed. When the equipment is no longer needed, then they need to follow the disposition instructions outlined in SF 428 as well as in the CFR.
Okay. And they would have to follow similar process for any kind of equipment that costs $5,000 or more, regardless of its current value and how it may have depreciated.
Correct.
Okay. So approximately 90 days before the project period end date, you will receive a pre-closeout letter from the Office of Grants Management communicating special closeout requirements and forms to be submitted. The letter also serves as an early reminder to you to begin the process of grant closeout. For those grantees who submit a no-cost extension, the pre-closeout letter from the ACF Office of Grants Management will be sent out 30 days before the extension project period end date. When the closeout review has concluded, the ACF Grants Office will issue a final closeout notice of award to you. The closeout action will be transmitted to the Division of Payment Management to close that document number from the grantee's payment account. Please be advised that ACF reserves the right to reopen a closed grant in the event of subsequent audit disallowance. Therefore, you should maintain your financial records, supporting documents, statistical records, and that kind of thing for a period of 3 years from the date of the final FFR. And again, the final FFR is to be submitted 90 days after the end of the project period. So that concludes our comments about closeout. I'm going to now transition to a discussion of no-cost extensions. No-cost extensions. If you determine that there's a need for additional time to complete your project, you may request a no-cost extension of up to 6 months. Your request must be submitted through Grant Solutions through the no-cost extension amendment. No-cost extensions must be justified and may not be approved if the purpose is only to expend unobligated balances of funds. So much like a carryover budget request, it's not simply a matter of spending down funds, but there have to be previously approved but unmet objectives for which the funds would then be used. A no-cost extension request should be submitted no later than August 7th, 2015, and contain the following information: a description of the activities that were not completed and why, the total number of additional months needed to complete the project, and a timeline showing when activities will be completed within the extended period. If you plan to have all programmatic activities cease by September 29th, 2015, and you only need staff or administrative time to complete data entry and reporting after that date, then you can obligate administrative personnel costs before September 29th, 2015 for this purpose. In this case, you don't need to file a no-cost extension. As long as the personnel obligation is for administrative purposes only, such as reporting, then the staff time can be obligated prior to September 29th, 2015, and then liquidated until the final SF425 is due December 30th, 2015. This is slightly different than previous guidance that we've provided, and this situation would not require a no-cost extension. So previously we've provided some guidance that indicated that any personnel costs may not be obligated beyond for time beyond the end of the budget period. In addition to the no-cost extension request, ACF will also review past PPRs to determine if project impediments were disclosed. If the request is approved, you will receive an amended notice of award citing the new project period end date and any special grant terms and conditions. Tim, are there things that you want to add to what I've just reviewed that's been provided in writing?
I think you covered it all, Stan. I just want to reiterate that no-cost extensions are not an entitlement, that they will be scrutinized, they will be reviewed against prior program progress reports that the grantees have submitted so that we can discern if there were impediments in the project and match that against the no-cost extension request. So it will be reviewed thoroughly by the agency and a determination will be made. If the determination is to disapprove the request, then of course you will receive that in writing vis-a-vis Grant Solutions. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Tim. I'm just going to scroll down a little farther, and I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'll just highlight the fact that there is a calendar with the dates scheduled for when you have to submit particular forms. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. One thing that I would draw your attention to is if you are submitting a no-cost extension award, you still will have to submit your second semi-annual progress report at the end of October, as you would if that were your last semi-annual progress report. And then you would have to submit another semi-annual progress report at the end of April because another semi-annual reporting period would have lapsed. And so when you submit a no-cost extension, you essentially have to do one additional PPR than you would otherwise. I think that covers the main territory of where we wanted to go. Now, I'm not quite sure how to stop sharing my screen, but I'm inclined. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here, and now we'll go to questions. If you have questions, we would ask that you submit them in the Q&A box, and that will enable us to see them and read them.
Dan, this is Stacy.
Yep.
When you are looking at your questions in the Q&A box, please click on the View Unanswered Questions tab.
So, okay, that's great. I noticed that there's a question in the chat box as well. So let me go to the chat. Please only submit questions in the Q&A under the Q&A tab. But since there is one in the chat function, we'll address that. The question in the chat frame says, so we have to complete an SF428 and SF429 for closeout as well, correct? Tim, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, that is correct. Both forms need to be completed and submitted with your other final documents at the time of grant closeout. And again, this information will be explained and will be attached to your 90-day schedule to terminate a letter that we will send out 90 days prior to the end of the project period. So it will have closeout instructions. It will have the appropriate forms to be completed and a reference to the websites where you can obtain these forms online as well.
So there's a question that, yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to give you further instructions about the unanswered questions.
Great.
And that is, it's under the Q&A where it says all.
Yeah.
Right-click on that. And then another menu pops up, and you should be able to choose unanswered.
I don't have an, oh, okay. Hold on. Almost had it. Open tab. unanswered. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
And then you'll be turning them off, I suppose?
Yes, I'll dismiss them after you answer.
So there's a question, what is the time frame for needing to complete the SF 428 if the items are used for a few years after the grant ends? Tim, do you want to respond to that one?
Sure. The 428 should be submitted with your final documents within 90 days post the project period end date. You can continue to use the equipment until you no longer need it, and at that point, then you would request disposition instructions from the awarding agency, or you can follow disposition instructions as it is relayed in the 428 form, or within the 45 CFR Part 90, I'm sorry, I'll revert it back to the old CFR, Part 75. So there will be no additional 428 form that will be necessary for disposition. You just continue to use the equipment until you no longer need it, and at that point, then we will decide how to dispose of it. And we can dispose of it in several different ways. You can sell the equipment and send the proceeds back to the awarding agency. The awarding agency may have another grantee in the area who could benefit from using the equipment, so we could transfer it to that particular grantee. So there's several options that we can entertain as it relates to disposition of equipment.
So there's a question, is this presentation available to us after today? It will be made available. We're actually redesigning the HPOG website on the ACF website, and there's going to be some an area of questions and answers, and it'll be posted there, and so you should have access to the information as you need it. And similarly, there was a person that asked that anticipates that their program director will be out on family medical leave, and they want all of the reporting documents, and the documents will be available on the website, and we'll send out a listserv about this. And if you do have any questions, then you can also contact your program specialist, and they'll be able to respond. There's a question for consortium grants. We will need to account for the equipment purchased by the sub-grantees as well, and that is correct. There's a question, how long does the approval process for a no-cost extension take? So part of the reason that we've requested that you submit it by August 7th is that we have an awareness that the project period ends September 29th, and we want to be able to respond in advance of that. We aim to complete no-cost extension requests within a 30-day time frame, but we don't always adhere or reach that goal. It's sometimes plus or minus some days. For consortium grants, I lost it.
It was the same question.
Okay. Regarding the no-cost extension, are we also submitting a budget to support any positions, program activity costs, etc.? So that's a good question. In many cases, as long as you're planning to do activities that were previously approved, then you don't need to submit a budget. It simply extends your existing budget by another 6 months. If you're requesting to make a budget change, in addition to a no-cost extension, then you could submit both the budget revision and the no-cost extension in one request. However, when you do that, the cover page should explain exactly what's being requested, and the budget detail should reflect in columnar format the budget that was previously approved and the changes that are being requested, as well as any justification for those changes. So I hope that that helps. If approved, when would grantees receive notice of no-cost extension? Part of that depends on when you submit the request, but it would be obviously no later than September 29th. How soon will grantees be notified of their request for a no-cost extension that was approved? As mentioned previously, ideally within 30 days, no later than September 29th. If you receive a renewal for your HPOG grant, I just lost it. Okay, so I'm going to go on to a different one. Does the SF 429-428 require serial numbers and locations of each piece of equipment as well as the purchase price? I don't have the form in front of me, and I don't know the answer to that question offhand. Perhaps you do, Tim.
I'm sorry, Stan. I'm trying to find the question on here, and I think I missed it too. What is the question again?
Does the 429 or 428, it would be the 428, require serial numbers and locations of each piece of equipment as well as the purchase price?
I'm not totally sure, and I don't have the form in front of me. I know that there are several parts to the 428. There is the 428 form itself. There's a Part B, C, and I think even a D. So it's very extensive, and it has instructions and directions there. But I don't know how much detail it requires.
Okay. The next question is, will the PRS be available until June 2016? There will be a webinar on the closing out of the PRS as well. And so this answer is, it depends. If you are not submitting a no-cost extension, then it will remain available to you through the end of December, when your final report is due. For those that do have a no-cost extension and don't submit a final report until June 2016, it will remain available to them through June 2016. But more on that to come. What is the final disposition of all hard copy records, such as HPOG applications, impact study forms, consent, etc.? I also have application supporting documents, such as pay records, residency documents, birth certificates that I'd like to destroy. So this kind of goes back to how long do you need to keep your records? We would recommend that you bear in mind that ACF reserves the right to reopen a closed grant in the event of a subsequent audit disallowance. So it basically is most contingent on your organization being audited and there being any audit findings. If there were audit findings and if we reopened it, then we would need to have access to those records. So you should maintain your financial records, supporting documents, statistical records for a period of 3 years from the date that the final financial report was submitted. I hope that's helpful. Will the no-cost extension require a format letter similar to a carryover? What about budget information? So it will if you go into Grant Solutions now, I believe that there's already a no-cost extension amendment completion checklist, and it will tell you the things that you need. You don't necessarily need to submit a budget with the no-cost extension because you're essentially requesting just a simple extension of the budget and not a reallocation of those funds within the budget. Property question: do you have to report property under $5,000? If so, will we complete the same procedure? If the property is valued, if it never had a value of $5,000, then you don't have to report it. Over $5,000 is what equipment was. Under $5,000 is what supplies was. So if you have remaining pencils at the end of the grant, you don't need to remind us about that. As we are closing down, we are losing vital staff. Do you suggest we fill those positions with temps or hire permanent employees, even though it would be for a short time? That's a strategic organizational decision that you need to make, and it's very difficult for us to provide input on that kind of decision. Can you clarify what administrative tasks include and exclude? For example, staff confirming training completion to enter into the PRS. So when we're thinking about administrative tasks, we would contrast that with personnel that are being paid to implement the program. So personnel that are teaching a class would be a programmatic personnel, and if they were going to continue to be paid from personnel, that would require a no-cost extension. But if a person is simply entering data, or if they're compiling data for a report, or if time is required in order for them to draft the narratives that need to be submitted with the report, those are administrative costs. Or if there's accounting tasks where bills are being paid and accounts are being reconciled, those are administrative tasks, and you would not need to submit a no-cost extension for those things. So if we are working with a training provider via contract, can they continue to use the equipment until needed? So yes, equipment, as indicated previously by Tim, you may continue to use the property as long as it's needed for its intended purpose. And the same rules that apply to grantees apply to any subawards, such as contracts that grantees make. And so in the same way that a grantee could continue to use a medical mannequin, for example, a subcontractor could also use a medical mannequin. How should HPOG 2 factor into our request for a no-cost extension, or does it not? For the most part, it should not. We're not really here to talk about the review of the applications which were submitted last Friday. However, I can tell you that if an award is made, one of the things that you'll have to be mindful of Just as with a carryover request, you wouldn't want a person to be getting paid out of the carryover funds and getting paid out of a new grant award fund. And in a similar way, if an organization did receive a new HPOG award and a person were listed on the personnel for that, then you wouldn't want them to be getting paid from that and also getting paid from the no-cost extension, because then they'd be getting double paid, and that would not be good. So there's those kinds of issues, but for the most part, they're separate grants, and so they'll be administered separately. If a sub-grantee desires to purchase equipment that they are currently using, will we be allowed to dispose of them accordingly, assuring we intend to end by the end of the grant year? I'm not entirely sure I understand that question. Tim, I'll turn this one over to you. If a grantee sells a piece of equipment, if a sub-grantee desires to purchase equipment that they are currently using, so I'm assuming from the question that the subcontractor wants to purchase the equipment from the grantee. What is it that the grantee should be thinking about?
Well, the same principles that apply to the grantee passed on by the grant award should also pertain to the sub-recipient or sub-grantee. So if the sub-grantee has purchased equipment for purposes of the grant, then they also can continue to use that equipment and be monitored by the grantee until such time that sub-grantee wants to dispose of the equipment. Then it would be the grantee's responsibility to ensure that it is disposed of in the correct manner, and any residual income that is received as a result of disposition should then be returned back to the federal agency.
Thank you, Tim.
So I hope that answers the question.
I hope so, too. Would it be beneficial for grantees to submit their request for a no-cost extension earlier than August 7th so they can be notified earlier of approval? We'd like to know as soon as possible for personnel concerns. Yes, you may submit your request earlier than August 7th. I think the only thing that we would want you to be mindful of is that you would be fairly certain that there would be unmet objectives. If you're on track to meet your objectives, then it might not make sense real early in advance to be submitting a no-cost extension. And the other thing is having a lot of confidence that as to that you would in fact have funds remaining, because that would be the other thing. But if you're confident that you'll have funds remaining and that you'll have unmet objectives, then I think it would make sense to be submitting a no-cost extension earlier. Tim, did you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, it seems to be, Stan, it seems to be a real concern about the delay and the Fed getting a response back to the grantee. And I would just say that sometimes the delay is because the grantee has not submitted a thorough request. So their application could be missing some information. They have not provided enough detail for us to assess the situation and make a determination. So in that case, we have to go back to the grantee and request additional clarifying information and that kind of thing. So if the grantee submits a thorough request and it consists of all of the components that we've outlined here, then it would be reasonable for us to turn the request around and make a determination within 30 days. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Tim. There's a question, are the documents outlined today available for download. If they're not already, they will be probably within a week or so. If a grantee requests and is approved for no-cost extension and is successfully awarded HPOG 2.0, what happens to the no-cost extension? Again, we're not going to dive into hypothetical scenarios that don't yet exist. They're separate grants, and so it's so they'll be treated separately. And I addressed some of the issues related to that with a prior question.
And Stan, if I could just add something here too, grantees should not be doing any contingency planning or anything like that. A no-cost extension, if it is applicable to the grantee, should be submitted because there is unfinished work to be completed in the 6-month or shorter time frame after the grant project period has ended. So please make sure that you're not requesting no-cost extension as a measure to keep funding going until you find out if you've been approved for the new award. It should be made just based on completing unfinished goals and objectives that have not been completed in the last budget period. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. There's a question, what will be the disposition for laptops under the $5,000 threshold? Since they're under $5,000, they're treated as supplies and not equipment. So you don't need to report on them. What about student records? Should those be kept for audit purposes as well? As I've shared previously, we think that you should maintain whatever records are relevant for the purpose of audits, and you should keep them for 3 years. Whether or not particular documents are relevant to the audit is a determination that you should make, and you should probably follow your organizational guidance, but we're not going to, it's not something that we're going to monitor pretty closely. That's something that you're going to have to make decisions for yourself. How soon can the no-cost extension be submitted? It's June, and you can submit a no-cost extension pretty much at any time. Again, you should have a pretty strong awareness that you'll have funds available and that there's work that is incomplete that still needs to be accomplished. Somebody just logged into Grant Solutions and clicked on the Amendments tab and did not see a no-cost extension amendment listed. So that's something that we'll check into. I know that we've prepared a checklist, so we'll work on that.
And they may also want to contact the Grant Solutions Help Desk for assistance as well.
If we are awarded HPOG 2, do we need to transfer equipment to this grant? I don't think so, but Tim, maybe you want to.
Yes, if a current grantee receives HPOG 2 award and they're using, and it's for the same really project continuation of the former project, then yes, the equipment can continue to be used in the new project as well.
So I understood that, but is there any form or administrative paperwork that they would have to do with that? Or they
no, because the the equipment will still belong to the first HPOG 1 grant, but it can still be used by the organization in the HPOG 2 program.
Okay. So is continuing to help graduated participants search for employment considered a legitimate use of the no-cost extension? yes, particularly if you've not met your employment goals. Would administrative staff that has been tasked with the collection of participant data and or to organize participant files for grantee archival be allowable cost allocation for the final 90 days after grant ending? Yes, that would be an administrative cost. Can unemployment for employees be paid until December 31st, or will grant coverage of this end September 29th? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Maybe you know, Tim.
Yeah. All benefits would cease for program employees, personnel, on September 29th when the grant ends. Those employees, those administrative employees, such as your accountant or the person who is tasked with assembling the final report, when you estimate the number of hours needed for them to complete those documents, or any compensation that would apply to those hours would also be allowable to charge to the grant in that extended period, that 90-day period, before the grant, before you submit your final document.
So I guess I was hearing that two ways, and maybe you can clarify, Tim. One way that I hear the question is like paying unemployment as part of their fringe, but the other way is the grant ends and a person is released from their position. Can HPOG funds then be used to pay unemployment somehow? But I don't understand how that works.
No, I don't either. When the grant ends, the grant has ended.
Yeah. Okay. Will there be another opportunity to discuss the disposition of equipment? I'm looking at the forms and I have a few questions. So I would recommend that you direct any questions that you have about the disposition of equipment to your program specialist or to Tim Chappelle in the Office of Grants Management. The state agency may have criteria for keeping student records. Yeah, as noted previously, you should definitely keep records that you need for audit purposes, but then your organization or even your state may have other requirements. I'm not sure which one we're on. Here's and it's changing. All unused vacation/sick days must be used prior to September 29th. Can staff being paid for their unused time? So I think that probably depends on your organizational policy. If at your organization people can be paid out for their unused annual or sick leave, then yes. But if they go and there's no policy that allows for that, then I would say no. Is that correct, Tim?
Yes, that's correct, Stan.
Do benefits end on September 29th for individuals tasked with the closeout? So if a person is continuing to be paid out of personnel and working on administrative tasks, then their benefits would also continue. But if they're not continuing, then their benefits do not continue either. Are completion of training and certification testing allowable reasons for no-cost extensions? Yes, the completion of training is allowable, and certification testing is also allowable reasons for the no-cost extension. I think we've answered some of them, and some of them appear to be duplicates. My question is not really a question. It is to inform people that state agencies may have record archive criteria. So, yeah, consult your state, consult your organization in terms of what the requirements for record keeping are. At this point in time, I think that we've answered all of the questions that we've received, and we only have 5 minutes remaining. So I think that this draws us to a natural conclusion in today's webinar. If you do have follow-up questions, like with so many other things, please plan to reach out to your assigned program specialist or Tim Chappelle in the Office of Grants Management. Looking down the road just a little bit, as mentioned previously, there will be a webinar on what the closeout of the PRS looks like and how you can obtain that data. And stay tuned for that and other activities as we continue to plan. Thanks so much for joining today, and we'll keep in touch. So long, everybody.